just what sort of bargain did Russian commanders have to strike to get Putin to sign off on their withdrawal from Kherson? And is Prigozhin somehow getting even more unhinged? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It is November 14th, 2022. This is your daily Ukraine update. Let's get into it. Okay, when we look at the map, we can see, first off, that, as discussed, the Ukrainian forces fully control everything to the north and west of the Dnipro River. Russia has completed their withdrawal and is currently, by most reports, digging in, establishing defensive positions all along this river here. This is a really strong defensive position for Russia, and while it will be almost impossible to get organized combat power to re-seize Kherson, it is definitely would be comparably difficult for Ukraine to conduct any sort of major operation across the river, because you have, of course, only two ways to get heavy vehicles across, and undoubtedly Russia has plenty of combat power trained right on these two bridges. So it's fair to say that the intensity of combat in the Kherson region is probably going to be dropping significantly, and this is telling for a couple of reasons. Most importantly, because Kherson up until this point was where the top tier of Ukrainian units and Russian MOD units were stationed. Now that these units are free, they can both be put towards their respective countries' next most important priority. Where is that is the big question. Well, we can infer from the tactical map here where we think Russia is likely to view as being its most important points. First, we have, of course, this line of contact here where we've seen routinely ground assaults happening. You can see here, there's 2 points where we've seen ground assaults partnered with artillery fire. This seems to be a very Russian way of doing things, to use artillery forces on a site and then follow it up with a ground attack. Though this village, again, I see some of these engagements along this line of contact, and I have a hard time seeing what they hope to achieve as far as any breakthroughs. These aren't these aren't territorially significant. These aren't really meaningful. This is just sort of almost like attacking for attacking's sake, and we might call these spoiling attacks. This is just to keep your enemy on their back foot, or to prevent them from organizing a more powerful or substantive attack on you. Again, having a hard time just seeing, given this large amounts of fairly empty territory, why this particular point of contact warrants Russia expending its very limited manpower to conduct attacks. More significant, right, you have, of course, continued efforts to try to seize Bilohorivka, and continually this is totally ineffectual. It seems like Russia just cannot make any progress here. I would be very curious, because if I were a commander, this is probably, if I were Russian commanders, this is probably where I would first allocate my elite tier of troop. You can see it's a natural and easily seizable chunk of territory. It's got this natural barrier here that's going to prevent Ukrainian forces from reinforcing from their northwest. And so, yeah, it's I mean, I don't know if it's intrinsically valuable, but creating a more even, unbroken salient is going to go a long way for Russian forces, who, again, you can see here, this little salient is actually potentially vulnerable to, Ukrainian attacks on several sides. So you want to get a more even, improved defensive line. Of course, Russia is definitely not listening to me. Instead, you can see here another series of attacks at this place, also named Bilohorivka. Looks like maybe a sort of mine or industrial area. But it looks like, again, they're trying to close these sort of gaps and salients in their line. This is sort of significant because it's at least a town along a roadway. So there is some sort of acknowledgement that this is at least not totally incomprehensible like the attacks along the Kharkiv line of contact in the north. Further down, we see, interestingly, where there isn't attacks, This is the Wagner group. They have been trying diligently to seize Bakhmut and have failed routinely, and maybe they're finally trying to actually rest and consolidate their combat power. Looks like they might be trying to also seize this Kurdium Kivka. Again, it's hard for me to really understand why you would launch so many attacks and have it just not be clear on what the larger strategic vision is, other than just attacking across this entire line. And it's just something that I have a hard time really gaining a lot of understanding. This I understand, right? You want to expand out your territory from Donetsk City. But there's just so much of this that I just struggle to really comprehend, right? This railway here, it's not that important. Ukraine very clearly isn't using it to reinforce Bakhmut. So then why would you want to cut it off? Why is cutting it off that significant? If you're going to do anything, you should try to maybe encircle Bakhmut by pushing along the north and the south, not wasting your combat power here. But again, as we've discussed, the people running Bakhmut is the catering company. And these guys are probably DNR and LNR units under a totally separate chain of command. They probably have no idea what the Wagner group in Bakhmut is doing. And as always, of course, we see them trying to expand out territory around Donetsk, which actually is sort of like a real plan. Like that's a real strategic decision, and maybe the only one we've seen from Russia. So then the question we're left with is, we think we know what Russia will try to do. Probably take its existing combat power and just disperse it meaninglessly among all these attacking points. And I don't think they may achieve some effects here, but without concentration of those elite forces, you're not going to see considerable effects. But then the question is, what should Ukraine do? Because it too is freeing up a lot of its combat power. Now, there's a couple of things that I think are really worth noting. One, most significantly, is the reports that there is continued a strong Ukrainian partisan operation in a lot of areas, but notably between Kherson and Mariupol. Right in probably the Melitopol area. Question is this a logical place for them to try to conduct a breakthrough? Probably not. It's probably hard to break through enemy lines when it would mean being surrounded on two sides. Instead, Ukraine may find it more effective. They could attempt to conduct the liberation of Lysychansk. That would probably be my next biggest priority, right, is to reinforce these forces near Belohorivka and to push the Russians back, get to the outskirts, and re-seize Lysychansk, right? That would be a significant victory and really, really more easily facilitated because, of course, you have this natural barrier making it very difficult for Russia to conduct resupply. But again, you could also see facilitating that Ukrainian forces push from Yampil and try to push into Crimea. There's a lot of options for Ukraine, but what they have to do is not make Russia's mistake. And that is, of course, dispersing these additional forces into too large an area. I think that would be one of their biggest tactical errors. Of course, you have a lot of spare combat power, but do you want to just take the grinding fight of Kherson against top-tier Russian troops and then throw them against top-tier Russian troops elsewhere? That's sort of the question on everyone's mind. And you really don't want to do that if you can avoid it. You want to put your best troops against the places where the juice is worth the squeeze, so to speak, where the operational or strategic targets are significant, right? Meaningful cities, meaningful roadways, meaningful terrain, but it's also guarded by lower quality Russian troops that will be more easily broken through. Easier said than done, for sure. But what's also worth noting, we're going to just pivot over to ground news, is old Prigozhin just can't stay out of the news. He, on his private Telegram, said that a former Wagner Group mercenary was filmed being executed with a sledgehammer to the head after changing sides in the Ukraine war as a traitor. I am confused by this on a number of levels. How did Wagner recapture their defector if he changed sides? And why would you not? Why would you film it and distribute this unless it was some sort of propaganda? And if so, who is the target of this propaganda? Is it other Wagner Group mercenaries? Is it somehow Russian ultranationalists who are going to see Prigozhin as a no-nonsense commander? I suspect that's who this is really about. This is probably to make Prigozhin look like the hard man willing to make the hard decisions, when a lot of the Russian Ministry of Defense looks like they are willing to take the quote easy way out, particularly after withdrawing from Kherson, right? Russian ultranationalists are furious about this. So that is what I suspect. Obviously, I am not going to be showing you that video. I don't think I'm even going to be reacting to it on the Patreon. But if you guys do want the combat videos, all the viral combat videos that you've seen, I try to do a reaction to them on the Patreon, right? YouTube won't let me show them. They're pretty, YouTube's cracking down on censorship. But thanks to my Lieutenant tier patrons, you guys are the ones who make this possible. And as always, check out the ground news. The link is in the description. I'll see you all in the next one.